Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. And today I'm going to offer what I think is a broadside against the Darwinian worldview and a defense of the alternative paradigm, which is structuralism. And I'll be revisiting my different times in my academic career. I've published in the development of the red cell on protein structure, and for the last 20 years I've been working on the genetics of the retina. Okay, and I'll be giving some little personal insights I got from these studies. Okay. Okay, so let's begin. What I'm going to argue here is that the cosmic fine-tuning of nature for life is so remarkable that it must extend beyond, as it were, the inorganic or cosmic sphere into the biological sphere. The universe is a unity. Biology is part of nature, and hence if the universe is, by common agreement of these top physicists, uniquely fit for life, then I think it's probably going to be fit for the evolution and origin of life as well. Okay, that's one of the points I'm going to make. Just to remind you of some of the elements of fine-tuning, I'm sure a lot of you know this, and so I'm going to go through these slides, these next two slides, quite quickly. Okay, if you take the electromagnetic force, if electromagnetism were stronger, the electrical repulsion between protons would be greater, threatening the stability of the atomic nucleus. And it's the same as gravity. If it was stronger or weaker, there wouldn't be stars, there wouldn't be planetary systems and such like. And we all know this famous quote from Hoyle. He says that, in fact, looking at the fine-tuning of the universe, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put the conclusion beyond question. And recently, Martin Rees, in his book Just Six Numbers, said roughly the same thing. Other cosmologists like Paul Davies have reiterated the same message. I'm just repeating a number of names here to make sure to everybody in the audience, this isn't my view. This is the view of modern astrophysics. Okay. So I'll just skip this slide. Just to remind you of some of the elements of fitness and nature for carbon-based life as it exists on Earth. The carbon atom is wonderfully fit for building complex molecules. And we know from that the fine-tuning has seeded the cosmos with the atoms of life. And the common atoms of life are all the commonest and most abundant in the cosmos. And the cosmos is awash with organics in space. Not only is carbon the chosen atom, but the cosmos is awash with organic compounds. And some of them, as this slide shows, are very big. In the Murchison meteor, millions of different organic compounds have been identified, which have been synthesized in space. Now, just a little touch about, everybody knows that the universe is fit for carbon-based life. I just want to mention one very intriguing fact which shows you that it's fit for advanced carbon-based life. This slide shows what is called the visual window in the atmosphere. The atmosphere blocks out harmful radiation and lets through visual light, which is essential for photosynthesis. Now, this is something quite incredible, which nobody in this room will have really thought through. Which are the gases in the atmosphere which open this window? Water, carbon dioxide, oxygen, and nitrogen. Which are the atoms which are used in photosynthesis to generate sugars and biological compounds? Exactly the same compounds. The same compounds have the right absorbance characteristic to let the visual light through, and guess what? They're the very compounds that are used to make organic compounds in photosynthesis. The author of the Encyclopedia Britannica said, this is awesome. And it is awesome. Yeah, okay. Next slide. The thermal properties of water are another example of fitness for advanced forms of life. I mean, obviously, the high thermal capacity of water and the evaporative cooling of water is probably essential to warm-blooded organisms using oxygen. So everything starts to fit together. Now, I can't give you a repeat of my book, Nature's Destiny, or a summary of what I'm doing in my new book, but the universe is not just fit for unicellular carbon-based life, it shows every evidence of being fit for advanced, complex organisms using oxygen. And it's also the Earth itself, which has been temperature-wise and chemically constant in the oceans for 4 billion years, is an ideal habitat for the long-term evolution of life like ourselves, okay? Now, this is what excites me, Kepler. It now seems not only is the universe full of organic compounds, it's full of planets like the Earth, with moons like the Earth, and oceans like the Earth. 10 to the 22 is the latest count given by NASA. 10 to the 22 planets that can sustain life like us in a universe flooded with organic compounds. So we see a trend here from 1800 to today, and as science advanced, it found more and more elements of fitness in the cosmic order. So, the universe exhibits many elements of fitness for life on Earth, and believe me, if I had time, I'd go through some elements of fitness which would blow you away, okay? The photosynthesis one blows me away, but anyway. And this raises a clear possibility. Given the trend to more and more fitness as science advances, it raises the possibility that the origin and evolution of life on Earth is an extension of cosmic evolution. Its origin and major paths determined by the laws of nature and not by cumulative selection alone, as Darwinists claim. So this strongly supports the possibility that life's origin and basic order are built into nature no less than the origin and order of the constituents of the inanimate world, atoms, crystals, planets, stars, and galaxy. Life on this theory will be an integral part of the cosmic whole. And this brings up the major topic now. That was a sort of an introductory section on the structuralist worldview. The structuralist worldview is based on the presumption that a lot of biological complexity or order arises lawfully like that of other natural forms. So structuralism flows naturally from the revelations of fitness that we've found in the last century. Before Darwin, I'll skip this slide. Before Darwin, many leading biologists were structuralists. They believed that evolution was directed by natural law. For instance, Richard Owen said that due to an innate tendency by which homogeneously created protozoan have risen to higher forms, evolution by law. Even Darwin's bulldog was attracted to structuralist ideas. Mary Windsor comments, he had not found the answer. Oops, sorry. He had not found. Goodness me, sorry. We'll leave that off now. We're running out. And in France, this famous comparative and honorable-mentioned biologist, he was also, of course, a structuralist. And in fact, he was the mentor of Richard Owen. And one of the great analogies was to draw an analogy with the basic forms of life and crystals and other inorganic forms. And this is another example. And so they were looking for what were called laws of form, logically. If the biological world was the product of natural law and the forms of life were the product of laws of form, then they would be looking for those laws of form. What the structuralists before Darwin believed in, that the primal patterns were like crystals, and on top of the primal patterns or the ground plans were grafted adaptive masks. And this just shows you the famous example, Owen's example of the pentadactyl limb, showing the adaptive masks, the bat's wing and the whale's flipper, grafted on the basic pattern. Here's the example of the vertebrate archetype and the various vertebrate masks, as it were, imposed on top of it. Insects are another example. And this is the example of the insect legs, where you have exactly the same basic ground plan, pattern or archetype adapted in various ways. So the primal patterns were like atoms and crystals built into the order of nature, and adaptive forms were grafted on top of them. Now, although structuralism suffered a major setback with the rise of Darwinian functionalism, it's never died. Here's one example, Darcy Wentworth Thompson. Another example, Brian Goodwin. And of course, Stuart Alan Kaufman and Stuart Newman, whose work overlaps a bit with Vincent Fleury's. Stephen Jay Gould, in his later days, And that's a famous confession of Gould's, that he only discovered structuralism late in his life, much to his regret. Interesting little bit of history, this. I hope by now you will have gathered that the idea that the evolution of life is built into nature and integral to the natural order is a huge challenge to the Darwinian worldview. I think it flows logically from fitness, and because it poses such an existential threat to Darwinism, when they opened the new Darwin Museum in South Kensington, they had to move Owen's statue from a prominent position in the museum to an unprominent position and put Darwin at the head of the staircase. And by the way, in passing, apologies to Vincent Fleury. I should have included him, his picture, after Stuart Newman. Because from his talk this morning, we have another leading structuralist with us, okay? Okay, let's look at some recent lines of evidence in support of structuralist ideas. First of all, surprisingly, the double helix, of course, is a chemical form. The double helix never evolved. It's a chemical form. Yeah. Now let's look at the protein area. This was an interest of mine a few years ago, and I published some papers in it, a concept column in Nature and things. If you look at proteins, you would be surprised that there was any sort of order to this chaos of atoms. But in fact, proteins are built of alpha helices and beta sheets. And this shows two examples. On the right is the globin fold, and on the left, the TIM barrel. You can see that they're made up of alpha helices and beta sheets. And this just shows the folding of them together. And this is a zoo of protein forms. It turns out that although the atoms in a protein look as if they're completely chaotic, in fact, basically, there are basic rules, laws of nature, which determine the forms of proteins, the basic forms of proteins. On one part of the slide, you can see alpha helices packed into a compact form. So various packing and higher order rules determine about 1,000 special protein forms. Okay? So the forms of proteins are determined by the laws of nature. It's like a periodic table. Just as the periodic table of atoms is synthesized in the stars, another periodic table of protein forms is also laid down in the order of nature. Each protein fold is adapted to a variety of functions. This is the globin fold. So the basic fold is adapted in various ways to perform many different functions. This is an exact echo of Richard's own concept of a primal pattern adapted to many different functions. It's exactly the same. So there are laws of protein form. These are the first clear biological laws of form that were sought after in the 19th century. It's not just, however, protein forms which are determined by the laws of nature, so are lipid forms. It's not just protein folds that are determined by the laws of nature. Many of the lipid forms in the cell are also determined by the laws of nature. Now, basically, it's also clear that various viscoelastic properties of cell clusters, and this is why I should have referred to, of course, to Vincent. This is Newman's work. There are sort of laws which are now constraining patterns of gastrulation. Well, that's some newly arising evidence for structuralism. But another way of finding support for structuralism is to ask how convincing are Darwinian explanations for the order of the world. This is a sort of negative type of argument. I'm building a consilience now, okay? So here we are on the Galapagos Islands. And as everybody knows, Darwin noticed a set of Finch species. And Darwin made a theory. He made an assumption. I'm jumping, of course, ahead here. Lauren, I'll just say this again. Okay. Darwin saw the finches on the Galapagos Islands, and he imagined that the adaptations they exhibited could all be derived from an original ancestral finch. So the two pillars of Darwinism are adaptation and gradualism. If everything in the biological world could be considered to be adaptive, and you could get there in gradual little steps, there would be no evolutionary problem. Correct? And structuralism would be out the window. But even a cursory examination of nature reveals a vast amount of pattern that is very difficult to put down to adaptation, such as maple leaf shapes, such as radiolarian shells, and many other examples. Consider, for instance, the difficulty of consider the difficulty of explaining petal numbers in daisies in terms of an adaptive paradigm. Actually, they follow the Fibonacci series. Some have 8, some have 13, some have 21, some have 34 petals. I have given this talk in many academic centers, and I've challenged the audience to even begin to give an adaptive explanation of petal number. No takers. Thank you. Next slide. So all you need to do is look in the garden to see a challenge to the adaptive paradigm. We've already discussed Owen's conception of the pentadactyl limb as a non-adaptive pattern. And I'm running out of time, so I'm jumping that one. This is an interesting set of patterns. The numerics of teeth. Placental mammals have a certain number of teeth, a certain pattern of teeth, and so do marsupials. And I've put this out to audiences all over the world. Give me an adaptive explanation of those numbers. It's the same as the daisy petals. No takers. Okay? And no paper published anywhere that I'm aware of gives any explanation. Okay, so now I've made one point. At the beginning of the talk, I said the universe is incredibly and uniquely fit for life as we see it on Earth. Number point. That leads logically to the structuralist view of nature. I have shown you my own work on protein form. I've talked about lipids, and I've talked about other things where there is certainly some evidence now for laws of form determining the form of biological structures. So I did a PhD and a postdoc at King's College in London, and my topic was the development of the red cell. And I had to face the fact that the development of the red cell was inexplicable in terms of an adaptive framework or a gradualistic framework. The final stage of red cell erythroid development, the cell throws out its nucleus. The process takes 8 minutes. And throughout the whole of mammalian history, it would have taken about 8 minutes because a cell sitting on a membrane is an unstable state. Now, the process of extruding the nucleus is a unique asymmetric cell division which involves the recruitment of a lot of unique gene circuits and cytoplasmic forms and structures. The complexity of the process is indicated to some degree on this slide, but of course the problem is now explaining how this came about, how this defining characteristic of class Mammalia came about gradually in little bits of adaptive steps. It's a fantastic. So we have here a challenge to gradualism. But there's another challenge too. There's a challenge to the adaptive paradigm. The story is that the mammals got rid of their nucleus so that they could carry oxygen to the tissues better than with the nucleated cell. But there's a problem. Anybody who has seen geese flying over Mount Everest and knows anything about avian physiology, birds have a higher temperature, a higher metabolic rate, and a higher demand of oxygen than mammals. They keep their nucleus. And this is a direct challenge to the adaptive paradigm here. In the mammalian fetus, the nucleus is also retained by the majority of cells in humans, for instance, up to about 12 weeks, 12 or 13 weeks. And the fetus has a high demand for oxygen too, like a bird. Okay? If you look at different mammalian red cells, they all are different sizes. Some are 7 microns, like ours, like other primates, but some deer have blood cells 2 microns across, giving an adaptive explanation of all the different red cell sizes in mammals is a Darwinian nightmare. And remember, we're talking here about the most important physiological process on planet Earth, bringing oxygen to the tissues of organisms that have high metabolic rates. One of the key functions. Now, even despite the telling of just so stories, nobody's got a good explanation for all these facts about red cell development. Now, briefly, if the red cell losing its nucleus was the only challenge to adaptive gradualism, well, perhaps you could pass it by, but it's not. This shows you the steps in the evolution of the feather. In fact, there are very distinct steps. This is the work of Richard Plum at Yale. Okay, the first step is the feather follicle, which is a hollow tube without any homology in any existing reptile structure. And this is the second stage, the plumaceous stage. But this is the killer. To go from the plumaceous stage to the pinnaceous stage, you have an extraordinary novel twisting helical growth within the heather follicle. Okay, now, just to assure you that the red cell, which can't be accounted for in adaptive gradualism, isn't any exception, let's read a bit of what Richard Plum says about the development of the feather. He says that, in fact, standard microevolutionary change and should be restructured to ask fundamentally different questions that focus directly on the mechanisms of the origins of qualitative innovations. This view underscores why the traditional neo-Darwinian approach to the origin of feathers exemplified by Bach have failed. And as I'm running out of time, because 5 minutes now, I think, isn't it? Oh, okay. I mean, I could give a long 15 minutes. I could give a long discussion about the feather, and I could show you some dramatic videos that are on the web showing how the helical twist occurs in the feather. It's more incredible than the loss of the red cell nucleus. And here's another recent quote from Douglas Irwin. I'm just putting these quotes up to show you that many authorities are rejecting the extrapolation, the Galapagos type extrapolation. Eric Davison, we argue here, and so forth. If you would like, you could read the first paragraph, perhaps, Lawrence. Yeah. So the red cell is not unique. Now, Scott Gilbert wrote the leading textbook in developmental biology in the United States. I'm on record in a 1996 paper saying that if the population genetics model of evolutionary biology isn't revised by developmental genetics, it will be as relevant to biology as Newtonian physics is to current physics. I have never made such a radical statement myself. And this is a quote from Gunther Wagner. Yeah, so that was Gunther Wagner describing some work on how the placenta originated. And in the Nature Genetics paper, he's claiming that there was a saltational event putting together 1,532 gene circuits at once to get the endometrial cell. That's a bit more than the red cell, but it's another example of the saltations in nature and the admission that they do exist and can't be explained by the leading lights in Evo Devo. This slide just shows another theme again, and I think we've had enough of them now, okay? So the universe is uniquely fit for life on Earth. There is evidence in protein forms, lipid forms of rules of form like the 19th century structuralists wanted, and now we're seeing that there's a profound problem in accounting for novelty. So there's something missing from the standard paradigm that we've all been brought up with, okay? That's what these quotes are clearly indicating now. Okay, now I want to turn to the last 20 years I've been working in human medical genetics. And I've been studying the genetics of the photoreceptor in the human retina. Like everybody else in genetics, over the last 20 years, which has been the dominant biological science, I've been looking for the blueprint. And why do you need a blueprint? Because if you have a contingent assemblage of elements, and you're going to transmit them through time and recopy them over and over again, you need a blueprint. Long before Darwin's mechanism and the idea that life were contingent assemblages of elements, English natural theology was wedded to an adaptational paradigm. Okay, and Paley's watch was another example of the English love of adaptationalism. Darwin was a follower of Ray and Paley. They were all adaptationalists. To stress again, if you're going to transmit and recopy contingent order, you need a blueprint which contains a detailed instruction of how to get it. You can't get it, and of course Darwinian order is contingent, and that's why. And now a terrible pincer is grabbing Darwinism. Darwinism needs a blueprint specifying in exhaustive detail all the tiny bits, adaptive bits acquired during evolution to build the machine. Okay? And the great biologist who realized that Darwinism needed a blueprint was August Weizmann, the evolution theory, one of the great classics in biology. He fixed his theory on 20th century science. When I first went into the Genome Project in '86, I was a gene centricist. This was by finding the genes, you could solve the secrets of life. Oh, by finding the genes, you could solve the secrets of life. Okay, they find all the diseases afflicting man and explain everything. Okay, in this magic blueprint. So, small wonder then that nearly all the founders of the mid-20th century molecular biology were strong mechanists like Weizmann, Monod, Crick, and Watson, were committed to preformism and the blueprint model. They had to be if they're going to be a Darwinist, right? So these are the cells that have interested me for the last 20 years, the photoreceptors in the human retina. They're exceedingly complex cytoarchitectures. But probably I studied the red cell, which is perhaps the simplest of cells, and I also studied the photoreceptor, which is the most complicated of cells, right? How does that complex architecture come about? You have 200 million identical rod photoreceptors in your eye, and in mammalian evolution, literally 10 to the 20, 20 to the 23, almost identical entities have occurred in the history of life. Yeah. Basically, every individual sitting in this room has 200 million identical photoreceptors in the eye. The photoreceptors in most mammals are very, very similar. If you compute how many photoreceptors have been generated over 100 million years of mammalian evolution, it's a very great number indeed. And so these incredibly complex cells come about during development. The cell architecture is amazingly complex, and the Darwinian mechanistic view demands there must be some blueprint to conserve the perfect replication of these cells. And as I say, when I first started doing the genetics of the photoreceptor, I was looking for the blueprint. Hundreds of genes have been identified which cause dysmorphologies in the cell, but every one of them is a constituent of the mature cell. So there's no evidence at all of any external set of genetic elements which are directing the cytoarchitecture of the cell. So my experience in looking for the blueprint is that as far as these photoreceptors are concerned, I don't think we'll ever find any blueprint. All we'll find is dysmorphologies caused by mutations in the constituents of the cell. And in any case, work in the last 5 to 10 years has demonstrated that the meaning of genes is not inviolate. August Weizmann said the gene meaning is inviolate, and it's passed through time. But the trouble is that genes mean different things in different contexts. It's now all my genetic colleagues have given up the blueprint model. And this is just a nice little couple of quotes from Nature recently. In a Nature opinion column commenting on the state of genomics, Collins is quoted, "Although the Human Genome Project has expanded the part lists for cells, there is no instruction manual for putting them together, like the photoreceptor." In another Nature article in Complexity, Mel Greaves confesses, "We fooled ourselves into thinking the genome was going to be a transparent blueprint, but it's not." Okay? So to summarize, what I've presented here is a consilience of different lines of evidence. The cosmos is fantastically and uniquely fit for life as it exists on Earth, and the logical inference is that the laws of nature have played some role in the origin and evolution of life. And I also mentioned some work which suggests that the structuralist paradigm, there's some evidence for it at the cellular level and the molecular level. And then I've mentioned some lines of evidence which suggest that Darwinism, traditional Darwinism, isn't going to give a comprehensive explanation for evolution, which is a prediction from the fitness and the structuralist paradigm. And so that's where I think I'll wrap things up. I think what I've said at least opens the door to the structuralist paradigm. It certainly suggests there's a lot of things about biology we don't understand and cannot explain in terms of our current framework of thinking. The red cell, the feather, the placenta, goes on endlessly. The problem with the genome now, and the problem that genes haven't got fixed meanings, they are context-dependent entities. Problem after problem is emerging, and so forth. Yeah, so thank you very much for for listening to this long talk, and thank you very much, Lawrence, for your translation. I hope I was sort of okay. It's